What kind of neighbor builds a fence to trap you in your own home? The kind who thinks they own the world, apparently. On a blistering July morning, Clara Hensley woke to the sound of metal screeching against metal, a grating noise that sliced through the quiet of her Wyoming ranch. She stumbled out of bed, her boots half on, and peered through the kitchen window. There it was, a chain-link fence, glinting under the sun, blocking the only road to her property. Her horses snorted in the distance, restless, as if they sensed the cage closing in. Clara's heart thudded. She'd lived on this land for 20 years, raising her daughter, tending her herd, and keeping to herself. The ranch was her sanctuary, her legacy. Now, someone had dared to choke it off. She threw on a flannel shirt and marched outside, the dry grass crunching under her boots. The fence stretched across the dirt road, padlocked to a post, with a sign slapped on it. HOA property line.
No trespassing.
Clara's blood boiled. The HOA, of course. The Willow Creek Homeowners Association had been a thorn in her side since the new subdivision sprouted up a mile away. They'd moved in with their manicured lawns and cookie-cutter houses, acting like they owned the whole county. But this was war. Clara didn't know who'd given the order, but she'd bet her best stallion it was Karen Whitaker, the HOA president with a smile like a snake's and a knack for making enemies. Clara grabbed her phone and dialed her neighbor, Old Man Tucker, who lived just beyond the subdivision. "Tuck, you see this nonsense?" she asked, her voice tight. Tucker's gravelly voice came through, laced with disbelief. "They put it up last night, Clara. Karen's saying your road's on their land. Got some surveyor's map to prove it." Clara's grip tightened on the phone. Her road? The one her grandfather carved out 70 years ago? The one she'd driven every day to get her daughter to school, to haul hay, to live her life? No chance in hell. She hung up and stared at the fence, her mind racing. She wasn't just going to tear it down. She was going to make them regret ever touching her land. By noon, Clara was at the county clerk's office, her boots leaving dust on the polished floor. The clerk, a wiry woman named Marla, pulled up the property records. "This is your road, Clara," Marla said, pointing to a faded map. "But the HOA's claiming an easement. Says they've got rights to control access." Clara's jaw clenched. An easement? That was a lie dressed up in legal jargon. She'd never signed anything, and neither had her parents. Marla leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Karen's been in here, too. She's got the HOA board wrapped around her finger. They're pushing hard." Clara's eyes narrowed. She didn't trust Karen's smug confidence, the way she strutted around like she owned the sun itself. Something was off. That evening, Clara stood at her kitchen table, maps and deeds spread out like a battle plan. Her daughter, Ellie, now 19 and home from college, leaned over her shoulder. "Mom, what are you going to do? They can't just block us in." Clara's lips twitched into a half-smile. "They think they can bully us, Ellie. But they don't know who they're messing with." She traced her finger along the map, stopping at the narrow strip of road that connected her ranch to the county highway. It was public land, technically, but the HOA had weaseled their way into controlling it through some shady deal with the township. Clara's mind clicked. If they wanted to play dirty, she'd play dirtier. She spent the next week digging, not just into the soil of her ranch, but into records, laws, and loopholes. She called in favors from old friends, including a lawyer named Sam who owed her for bailing him out of a bar fight years ago. Sam confirmed her suspicions. The HOA's claim was shaky at best, built on a forged document and a surveyor who conveniently worked for Karen's cousin. But fighting it in court would take years, and Clara didn't have that kind of time. Her horses needed to move, her supplies needed to come in, and her patience was wearing thin. Then Sam dropped a bombshell. "Clara, that road? It's not just an easement. It's for sale. The county's looking to offload it to cut costs." Clara's heart skipped. "How much?" she asked.
Sam grinned.
"More than you've got in the bank, but less than you'd think." Clara didn't sleep that night. She sat on her porch, the stars sprawling above her, and thought about her grandfather, who'd built this ranch with nothing but grit and a dream. She thought about Ellie, who deserved to inherit a home, not a prison. And she thought about Karen, sitting in her pristine suburban castle, laughing at the hick rancher. She thought she'd outsmart it. By dawn, Clara had a plan. It was reckless, audacious, and probably a little unhinged. But it was hers. She wasn't just going to fight the HOA, she was going to own them. Clara's plan was a gamble, but she'd never been one to back down from a long shot. She spent days crunching numbers, pulling every cent she could from her savings, her retirement, even the emergency fund she'd set aside for Ellie's future. It wasn't enough. The county wanted $150,000 for the road, a steal compared to its value, but a fortune for a single mother scraping by on a rancher's income. She sat at her kitchen table, staring at the numbers until her eyes burned. Ellie hovered nearby, her face tight with worry. "Mom, this is crazy. What if it doesn't work?" Clara looked up, her voice steady. "Then we go down swinging, kid." She called Sam again, who connected her with a local banker named Rita, a no-nonsense woman who'd grown up on a ranch herself. Rita listened as Clara laid out her plan. Buy the road, take control, and turn the tables on the HOA. Rita's eyes gleamed with something like admiration. "You're nuts, Clara, but I like it. I can get you a loan, but it's risky. You'll be betting the ranch, literally." Clara nodded. She'd already bet her heart on this land years ago. What was a little more? By the end of the week, Clara had the loan secured, but it came with a catch. She had to act fast. The county was holding an auction for the road in 10 days, and Karen's HOA was already circling like vultures. Clara drove to the auction site early, her truck rattling over the uneven dirt. The lot was a dusty patch of land near the courthouse, where a small crowd gathered under a sagging tent. Karen was there, of course, her blonde hair pulled tight in a bun, her lips curled in a smirk as she whispered to her lackeys. Clara felt a surge of fury, but kept her face blank. She wasn't here to argue. She was here to win. The auction began, and Clara's heart pounded as the bids climbed. Karen's HOA threw out numbers like they were pocket change, confident they'd scare off any competition. But Clara had done her homework. She knew the HOA's budget was stretched thin from their latest clubhouse renovation. When the bid hit $140,000, Karen hesitated, her eyes darting to her treasurer, who shook his head. Clara seized her moment. $150,000, she called, her voice cutting through the murmurs. The crowd gasped. Karen's face twisted, her composure cracking like thin ice. "You can't afford that," she spat. Clara just smiled. "Watch me." The gavel fell, and the road was hers. Clara's hands shook as she signed the papers, the weight of what she'd done sinking in. She'd just bought a street. A damn street. But the victory was bittersweet. Owning the road didn't solve everything. The HOA still controlled the subdivision, and Karen wasn't the type to slink away quietly. Clara drove home, her mind already spinning with the next steps. She needed to hit them where it hurt, and she had an idea that made her stomach twist with both fear and excitement. That night, a twist came that Clara hadn't expected. Ellie burst into the kitchen, her phone glowing with a text from Tucker's grandson, who worked at the county office. "Mom, you need to see this." She handed Clara the phone, where a blurry photo showed a document, a backdated deed claiming the HOA owned not just the road, but a chunk of Clara's ranch. It was a fake, clearly, but a clever one. Karen had been playing a deeper game, one that could have stripped Clara of everything if she hadn't acted first. The betrayal stung, but it also lit a fire in Clara's chest. This wasn't just about a road anymore. It was about protecting her home, her daughter, her life. Clara spent the next morning with Sam, poring over the forged deed. It was sloppy work, but dangerous. If Karen had gotten away with it, Clara's ranch would have been carved up for condos before she could blink. Sam promised to file a fraud complaint, but Clara knew that wouldn't be enough. She needed to strike back hard. She pulled up the HOA's bylaws, a dense packet she'd gotten from Marla. There it was, buried in fine print. The road's owner had leverage over the HOA's infrastructure. Clara's lips curled. She didn't just own the road. She owned their lifeline, their water lines, their utilities, their access. And she was about to make them pay. Clara's next move was surgical. She called a meeting with the HOA board, using her new ownership of the road as leverage. The meeting was set for the community center, a sterile building with fluorescent lights and plastic chairs. Clara walked in alone, her boots echoing on the linoleum, her jaw set. Karen sat at the head of the table, flanked by her loyalists, a treasurer with a nervous tick and a secretary who wouldn't meet Clara's eyes. The air was thick with tension, like a storm about to break.
Clara didn't sit.
She stood, her hands planted on the table, and laid out her terms. "I own the road now," she said, her voice low but sharp. "That means I control your water, your power, your everything. You want access? You pay for it. Triple the dues, starting next month." The room erupted. Karen's face turned crimson, her voice rising to a shriek. "You can't do that. This is extortion." Clara didn't flinch. "You blocked my gate. You forged a deed. You want to talk about extortion? Look in the mirror." The treasurer sputtered. The secretary scribbled furiously, but Clara held their gaze. She wasn't bluffing. Karen stood, her chair scraping back. "You're a nobody, Clara. A rancher playing at power. We'll bury you in court." Clara leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Try it. I've got the county records, the forged deed, and a lawyer who eats HOAs for breakfast. You're done." The room went silent. Karen's eyes flickered with something new, fear. For the first time, she wasn't in control, and it burned her. Clara turned and walked out, leaving the board in chaos. She'd won this round, but she knew Karen wouldn't go down without a fight. Back at the ranch, Clara's victory felt hollow. Ellie was quiet, her usual spark dimmed. "Mom, what if they come after us? Like, really come after us?" Clara pulled her daughter close, her heart aching. "They can try, but we're tougher than they are." Still, doubt gnawed at her. Karen's desperation made her dangerous, and Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something worse was coming. She spent the next few days fortifying her position, meeting with Sam to file injunctions, and reaching out to other ranchers who'd been bullied by the HOA. She wasn't alone anymore. Tucker offered his support, and even Marla slipped her extra documents to bolster her case. Then came the twist that nearly broke her. Late one night, Clara woke to the smell of smoke. She bolted outside, her heart in her throat, and saw flames licking the edge of her pasture. Someone had set fire to her hay bales, the lifeblood of her horse's winter feed. She and Ellie worked frantically with hoses, beating back the flames until the fire department arrived. By dawn, half the bales were ash, and Clara's hands were blistered. The sheriff found an empty gas can nearby, but no prints, no proof. Clara didn't need proof. She knew it was Karen's doing, a desperate jab to break her spirit. But instead of breaking, Clara's resolve hardened. She wasn't just fighting for her ranch now. She was fighting for justice. She called an emergency meeting with the other ranchers, gathering them in her barn under the glow of a single bulb. They were a rough crew, weathered by years of hard work, but their eyes burned with the same fire Clara felt. "The HOA thinks they can scare us," she said, her voice steady. "They think we'll bow. But we're not their pawns. We're taking them down." The ranchers nodded, their murmurs rising like a war cry. Clara laid out her plan: use her control of the road to choke the HOA's resources, force them to negotiate, and expose their fraud to the county. It was risky, but it was their only shot. The confrontation came faster than Clara expected. Karen, backed into a corner, called a public town hall, thinking she could rally the subdivision's residents against Clara. The community center was packed, the air buzzing with nervous energy. Clara walked in with Sam and Tucker, her head high despite the hostile stares. Karen stood at a podium, her voice dripping with false sincerity as she painted Clara as a greedy opportunist. "She's holding our community hostage," Karen declared, pointing at Clara. "She's extorting us with her road." The crowd murmured, some nodding, others unsure. Clara stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "You want to talk about hostages? You blocked my gate. You tried to steal my land with a forged deed. You set fire to my hay." Gasps rippled through the room. Karen's face paled, but she doubled down. "Lies. You have no proof." Clara held up a folder, its contents shaking in her hand. "I've got the deed, the surveyor's emails, and witnesses who saw your cousin sneaking around my ranch. You're not just a bully, Karen. You're a criminal." The crowd turned, their murmurs shifting to outrage. Karen's allies fidgeted, their confidence crumbling. The turning point came when Marla, the county clerk, stood up from the back. "I've seen the records," she said, her voice clear. "Clara's right. The HOA's been lying to you all." The room exploded. Residents shouted, demanding answers. Karen tried to speak, but her voice was drowned out. Clara didn't gloat. She didn't need to. The truth was out, and it was sharper than any fence. By the end of the night, the HOA board was in disarray, and Karen's reign was teetering. But Clara knew it wasn't over. Karen was too stubborn to surrender, and Clara braced for one final blow. The next morning, Clara found her gate smashed, the chain-link fence torn down, and a spray-painted message on her barn. "You'll pay." Her stomach churned, but she wasn't surprised. Karen was unraveling, lashing out like a cornered animal. Clara called the sheriff, who promised to investigate, but she didn't wait for him. She drove to the HOA's office, where Karen was holed up, and walked in without knocking. Karen looked up, her eyes bloodshot, her desk littered with papers. "Get out," she hissed. Clara didn't move. Karen's empire crumbled faster than Clara had imagined. The county's audit uncovered years of mismanagement, shady contracts, inflated budgets, and kickbacks to Karen's inner circle. The forged deed was the final nail. Karen was arrested for fraud, her smug smile replaced by handcuffs as she was led out of the HOA office. The residents, furious at being duped, voted to dissolve the HOA board and elect new leadership. Clara didn't attend the vote. She was back at the ranch, rebuilding her hay stores with help from Tucker and the other ranchers. The gate stood open, the road hers, the air lighter than it had been in months. But the victory came at a cost. Clara's savings were gone, her loan payments loomed, and the fire had left scars on her land and her heart. She sat with Ellie one evening, the two of them on the porch, watching the sun dip below the hills. "Was it worth it, Mom?" Ellie asked, her voice soft. Clara took her hand, her calluses brushing against Ellie's smooth skin. "Every penny. This place, this life, it's ours. No one gets to take that from us." Ellie smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it reached her eyes. Clara's fight hadn't just saved her ranch. It had sparked something bigger. The other ranchers, inspired by her stand, began pushing back against developers eyeing their land. They formed a coalition, pooling resources to protect their way of life. Clara became their unofficial leader, not because she wanted the spotlight, but because she'd shown what was possible. She'd taken on a giant and won, not with money or power, but with grit and truth. One afternoon, as Clara repaired a fence, a car pulled up. It was Marla, holding a thick envelope. "The county's refunding part of your road purchase," she said. "Turns out they overcharged you." Clara stared, stunned. It wasn't enough to erase her debt, but it was a lifeline. She thanked Marla, her voice thick with emotion, and tucked the envelope away. As Marla drove off, Clara looked out at her land, the rolling pastures, the horses grazing, the open road. She'd fought for every inch of it, and she'd do it again. Months later, the subdivision was quieter, the air less charged with Karen's influence. The new HOA board reached out to Clara, offering to negotiate fair access to the road. She agreed, but on her terms. No more fences, no more threats, and a promise to respect the ranchers' rights. The residents, many of whom had been misled by Karen, sent apologies, some in person, others in handwritten notes slipped under her gate. Clara read them all, her heart softening. They weren't all bad, just caught in a system that rewarded greed over community. Ellie, now back at college, called every week, her voice brighter with each conversation. "You're kind of a legend, Mom," she teased. Clara laughed, brushing it off, but she felt a quiet pride. She'd shown Ellie what it meant to stand up, to fight for what mattered, even when the odds were stacked against you. The ranch was thriving again, the horses strong, the land healing. Clara hired a few local kids to help with chores, giving them a taste of the life she loved. She taught them how to ride, how to mend fences, how to listen to the land. One evening, as Clara sat by the fire, she found an old photo of her grandfather, his face weathered but fierce, standing on the same porch she now called home. She traced his features, feeling the weight of his legacy. He'd built this place to endure, and she'd carried that torch. The fight with the HOA had tested her, pushed her to the edge, but it had also reminded her who she was. Not just a rancher, but a guardian of something bigger, a way of life, a promise to the land and the people she loved. Clara stepped outside, the night air cool against her skin. The stars were bright, the same ones her grandfather had seen, the same ones Ellie would inherit. She thought of Karen, now facing trial, her power stripped away. Clara didn't hate her. She pitted her. Karen had fought for control, for status, for things that crumbled under pressure. Clara had fought for home, and home was forever. As spring rolled in, Clara's ranch bloomed with new life. The pastures greened, the foals wobbled on new legs, and the road stayed open, a quiet testament to her victory. She walked it often, her boots kicking up dust, feeling the freedom of every step. The ranchers' coalition grew stronger, their voices loud enough to sway county policies. Developers backed off, wary of the fire they'd ignited in Clara and her neighbors. The land was safe, at least for now. One morning, a young couple from the subdivision stopped by, nervous but earnest. They wanted to learn about ranching, to understand the life Clara fought for. She invited them in, shared coffee, and told stories of her grandfather's days. They left with a new respect, and Clara felt a spark of hope. Maybe the divide between the ranchers and the newcomers wasn't so wide after all. Maybe, with time, they could build something better together. Clara's loan payments were still a burden, but she managed, cutting corners where she could, and leaning on the community she'd helped forge. Tucker brought over homemade pies. Marla dropped off extra hay, and Sam offered free legal advice when developers sniffed around again. Clara wasn't alone anymore, and that made all the difference. She'd turned a fight into a movement, a fence into a bridge. On a clear evening, Clara stood at her gate, watching the sun set over the hills. Ellie was home for the weekend, her laughter echoing from the barn as she played with the horses. Clara closed her eyes, letting the sounds of her life, the wind, the hoofbeats, her daughter's voice, wash over her. She'd faced down a giant, lost sleep, burned her savings, and come out stronger. The ranch was hers, not just in deed, but in spirit. She'd fought for it, bled for it, and won. And as the stars began to twinkle, Clara knew she'd do it all again. For her land, for her family,
For home.